The background of the diary is a little suburb near Paris. Everything that happens here happened in this little place called Louvciennes. Louvciennes resembles the village where Madame Bovary lived and died. It is old, untouched and unchanged by modern life. It is built on a hill overlooking the Seine. On clear nights one can see Paris. It has an old church dominating a group of small houses, cobblestone streets, and several large properties, manor houses, a castle on the outskirts of the village. One of the properties belonged to Madame du Barry. During the Revolution her lover was guillotined and his head thrown over the ivy-covered wall into her garden. This is now the property of Coty. There's a forest all around in which the kings of France once hunted. There's a very fat and very old miser who owns most of the property of Louvciennes. He's one of Balzac's misers. He questions every expense, every repair, and always ends by letting his houses deteriorate with rust, rain, weeds, leaks, cold. Behind the windows of the village, old women sit watching people passing by. The street runs down unevenly towards the Seine. By the Seine there's a tavern and a restaurant. On Sundays people come from Paris and have lunch and take the rowboats down the Seine as Maupassant loved to do. The dogs bark at night. The garden smells of honeysuckle in the summer, of wet leaves in the winter. One hears the whistle of the small train from and to Paris. It is a train which looks ancient and which carried the personages of Proust's novels to dine in the country. My house is 200 years old. It has walls a yard thick, a big garden, a very large green iron gate for cars, flanked by a small green gate for people. The big garden is in the back of the house. In the front there's a gravel driveway and a pool, which is now filled with dirt and planted with ivy. The fountain emerges like the headstone of a tomb. The bell people pull sounds like a giant cowbell. It shakes and echoes a long time after it's been pulled. When it rings, the Spanish maid, Emilia, swings open the large gate, and the cars drive up the gravel path, making a crackling sound. There are 11 windows showing between the wooden trellis covered with ivy. One shutter in the middle was put there for symmetry only, but I often dream about this mysterious room which does not exist behind the closed shutter. Behind the house lies a vast, wild, tangled garden. I never liked formal gardens. At the very back is a wooded section with a small brook, a small bridge overrun with ivy and moss and ferns. The day begins always with the sound of gravel crushed by the car. The shutters are pushed open by Emilia, and the day admitted. With the first crushing of the gravel on the wheels comes the barking of the police dog, Banco, and the carillon of the church bells. When I look at the large green iron gate from my window, it takes on the air of a prison gate. An unjust feeling, I know. Since I know I can leave the place whenever I want to, since I know that human beings place upon an object or a person this responsibility of being the obstacle, when the obstacle lies always within oneself. In spite of this knowledge, I often stand at the window staring at the large, closed, iron gate, as if hoping to obtain from this contemplation a reflection of my inner obstacles to a full, open life. No amount of oil can subdue its rheumatic creaks, for it takes a historical pride in its 200-years-old rust. But the little gate, with its overhanging ivy like disordered hair over a running child's forehead, has a sleepy air and a sly air, an air of being always half open. I chose the house for many reasons, because it seemed to have sprouted out of the earth like a tree, so deeply grooved it was within the old garden. It had no cellar, and the rooms rested right on the ground. Below the rug, I felt, was the earth. I could take root here, feel at one with the house and the garden, take nourishment from them like the plants. The first thing I did was to have the basin and fountain unearthed and restored. Then it seemed to me that the house came alive. The fountain was gay and sprightly. I had a sense of preparation for a love to come, like the extension of canopies, the unrolling of ceremonial carpets, as if I must first create a marvelous world in which to house it, in which to receive adequately this guest of honor. It is in this mood of preparation that I pass through the house, painting a wall through which stains of humidity show, hanging a lamp where it will throw Balinese shadows, plays, draping a bed, placing logs in the fireplace. Every room is painted a different color, as if there were one room for every separate mood, lacquer red for vehemence, pale turquoise for reveries, peach colors for gentleness, green for repose, and gray for work at the typewriter. Ordinary life does not interest me. I seek only the high moments. I'm in accord with the surrealist, searching for the marvelous. I want to be a writer who reminds others that these moments exist. I want to prove that there is an infinite space, infinite meaning, infinite dimensions. But I'm not always in what I call a state of grace. I have days of illuminations and fevers. I have days when the music in my head stops. Then I mend socks, prune trees, can fruits, polish furniture. But while I'm doing this, I feel I am not living. It was to this place that Henry Miller came one day, introduced by a young lawyer who had given me some advice on the copyrights of my book on D.H. Lawrence. When I saw Henry Miller walking towards the door where I stood waiting, I closed my eyes for an instant to see him by some other inner eye. He was warm, joyous, relaxed, natural. He would have passed anonymously through a crowd. He was slender, lean, not tall. He looked like a Buddhist monk, a rosy-skinned monk, with his partly bald head aureoled by lively silver hair, his full, sensuous mouth. His blue eyes were cool and observant, but his mouth was emotional and vulnerable. His laughter was contagious, and his voice caressing and warm like a Negro voice. He was so different from his brutal, violent, vital writing, his caricatures, his Rabelaisian farces, his exaggerations. The smile at the corner of his eyes was almost clownish. The mellow tone of his voice was almost like a purring content. He's a man whom life intoxicates, who has no need of wine, who is floating in a self-created euphoria. In the middle of a serious discussion between Richard and Joaquin, he began to laugh. Seeing the perplexity on Richard's face, he said,
"I'm not laughing at you, Richard, but I just can't help myself. I don't care a bit who's right. I'm too happy. I'm just so happy right at this moment with all the colors around me, the fire in the fireplace, the good dinner, the wine. The whole moment is so wonderful, so wonderful."
He talked slowly, as if enjoying his own words. He installed himself completely in the present. He appeared gentle and candid. He admitted he had only come because of Richard's promise of a good dinner. But now he wanted to know the whole house, everyone living in it, what each one did, and he asked question after question with casual unrelentingness. Henry Miller talked with Joaquin about music, about his compositions and his concerts. He went to shake my mother's hand. He visited the garden, looked over the books. He was full of curiosity. And then, sitting by the fire, he began to talk about himself.
Last night I spent the night in a cinema de quartier. I had nowhere else to go. Richard was entertaining his girl. I watched the film 3 times because the actress reminded me of my wife, June. Then I slipped down into the seat and went to sleep. You know, they never clean up the place until morning, and even then the femme de ménage only grunts when she sees me and lets me off. Did you ever stay in a movie house when it's empty? You know, films are like a dose of opium. And as you come out into the street, it's a shock, and you're brutally awakened from your dream. But when you stay, you never wake up. The dream goes on working. I would fall asleep for a while and then see images on the screen, and I couldn't tell the difference between the film and a dream. I saw my wife, June, as she looked when she announced to me one morning in New York, "You've always wanted to go to Paris and become a writer. Well, I have the money, but I can't go with you. I'll follow you later." The story on the screen was about a woman who lied. She lied, and damn it, she made the lie come true. She wanted to become an actress, so she invented that she had a love affair with the best known of all the actors and publicized it so well, in such heightened colors, that the actor himself came to confront her. And then she explained to him why she had done it, describing at the same time the scenes which had taken place between them with such charm that he stayed on and fulfilled all that she had invented as if it had been a prophecy. My wife, June, can confuse me in this way. She stayed in New York to earn money for my trip. Don't ask me how she earns the money. Every time I tried to find out, I ran into such complicated stories, intrigues, miraculous barters, that I gave up trying to understand. Everything she did had that air of magic. "You want to go to Paris, Henry? I'll find a way. The rent is due? Oh, let me see the landlord." She reminded me of the gypsies I saw in the south of France. When they come home, they lift up their skirt, and presto, there's a chicken or two they've stolen. I felt that June's stories were lies, but I could not disprove them. I felt that her bargaining power came not from objects or ingenuity, but from giving herself. She would tell me to keep on writing and forget about all this, but I could not write. I spent all my time trying to figure out how she solved these problems without going to work, like everybody else. She never answered direct questions. She reminded me of the Arabs who believe that true intelligence consists of concealment of your thoughts. But damn it, you conceal your thoughts from an enemy, not a husband, lover, friend. She always said she concealed her thoughts from me, because whatever she did tell me, I would turn around and caricature. But I only do this when I'm angry. If she read a book, sooner or later I would discover it had been given to her by somebody else, and that her opinion of the book belonged to the giver. Other times she even told people that it was she who had first made me read Dostoevsky and Proust. I don't know why I'm talking in the past tense. She's coming in a few weeks.
The two sides of himself showed simultaneously acceptance and passivity in life, rebellion and anger at whatever happened to him. He endured and then must avenge himself, probably in his writing, the writer's delayed reaction. June is an irritant. He turns away into the uncomplicated worlds that he enjoys.
I like the prostitutes. There's no pretense there. They wash themselves in front of you.
Henry's like a mythical animal. His writing is flamboyant, torrential, chaotic, treacherous, and dangerous.
Our age has need of violence.
I enjoy the power of his writing, the ugly, destructive, fearless, cathartic strength, the strange mixture of worship of life, enthusiasm, passionate interest in everything, energy, exuberance, laughter, and sudden destructive storms baffles me. Everything is blasted away. Hypocrisy, fear, pettiness, falsity. It is an assertion of instinct. He uses the first person, real names. He repudiates order and form and fiction itself. He writes in the uncoordinated way we feel, on various levels at once. Some time later, Henry appeared in Louvciennes with his wife, June. As June walked towards me from the darkness of the garden into the light of the door, I saw for the first time the most beautiful woman on earth. A startlingly white face, burning dark eyes, a face so alive I felt it would consume itself before my eyes. Years ago I tried to imagine a true beauty. I created in my mind an image of just such a woman. I had never seen her until last night, yet I knew long ago the phosphorescent color of her skin, her huntress profile, the evenness of her teeth. She is bizarre, fantastic, nervous, like someone in a high fever. Her beauty drowned me. As I sat before her, I felt I would do anything she asked of me. Henry suddenly faded. She was color and brilliance and strangeness. By the end of the evening, I had extricated myself from her power. She killed my admiration by her talk. Her talk. She lacks the courage of her personality, which is sensual, heavy with experience. Her role alone preoccupies her. She invents dramas in which she always stars. I'm sure she creates genuine dramas, genuine chaos and whirlpools of feelings, but I feel that her share in it is a pose. That night, in spite of my response to her, she sought to be whatever she felt I wanted her to be. She's an actress every moment. I cannot grasp the core of June. Everything Henry has said about her is true. By the end of the evening I felt as Henry did, fascinated with her face and body, which promises so much, but hating her invented self, which hides the true one. This false self is composed to stir the admiration of others, inspire others to words and acts about and around her. I feel she does not know what to do when confronted with these legends which are born around her face and body. She feels unequal to them. That night she never admitted, "I didn't read this book." She was obviously repeating what she had heard Henry say. They were not her words, or she tried to speak the suave language of an English actress. She tried to subdue her feverishness to harmonize with the serenity of the house, but she could not control her endless smoking and her restlessness. She worried about the loss of her gloves as if it were a serious flaw in her costume, as if wearing gloves were enormously important. It was strange. I, who am not always sincere, was astonished and repelled by her acting. I recalled Henry's words. She seems perverse to me. The extent of her falsity was terrifying, like an abyss. Fluidity, elusiveness. Where was June? Who was June? There is a woman who stirs others' imaginations. That is all. She has the essence of the theater itself, stirring the imagination, promising such an intensity and heightening of experience, such richness, and then failing to appear in person, giving instead a smoke-screen of compulsive talk about trivialities. Others are roused, others are moved to write about her, others love her as Henry does, in spite of himself. And June, what does she feel? Feeling the conflict between my two lives, the life of Henry and June and the life I knew before I met them, I finally decided to see a Dr. Allendy, who was a very famous analyst at the time and also well known for his lectures at the Sorbonne on every new idea and every exploration in Paris at the time. So I say that today, for the first time, I rang the bell of Dr. Allendy's house. I was led by a maid through a dark hallway into a dark salon. The dark brown walls, the brown velvet chairs, the dark red rug received me like a quiet tomb, and I shivered. The only light came from a greenhouse on which it opened. It was filled with tropical plants, surrounding a small pool with goldfish in it. A pebble bath circled the pool. The sun filtered through the green leaves gave a subdued greenish light, as if I were at the bottom of the ocean. It seemed apt to leave ordinary daylight behind for the exploration of submerged worlds. Dr. Allendy's office was soundproofed by a heavy black Chinese curtain, embroidered in gold thread with a few papyrus branches. When the time came, he slid a door open and then lifted the curtain and stood there, very tall, his eyes the most alive part of his face, the eyes of a seer. He has very brilliant, even, small teeth and bold features. He is heavy, and his bearded face gives him a patriarchic air. It was almost a surprise to feel him a moment later sitting quietly behind the Morris chair on which I sat, rustling notepapers and pencils and talking softly. It would have seemed more appropriate for him to be doing horoscopes or preparing an alchemist formula or reading a crystal ball, because he looked more like a magician than a doctor. We talked first of all about his books, his lectures, and my reaction to them. I talked about my work and my life in general. I said I had always been very independent and had never leaned on anyone. Dr. Allendy said, "In spite of that, you seem to lack confidence." He had touched a sensitive spot, confidence. Dr. Allendy rose from his chair and said, smiling, "Well, I'm glad you can stand on your own feet and that you don't need any help." I started to weep. He sat down again. Confidence. My father did not want a girl. My father was overcritical. He was never satisfied, never pleased. I never remember a compliment or a caress from him. At home, only scenes, quarrels, beatings, and his hard blue eyes on us looking for the flaws. When I was ill with typhoid fever, almost dying, all he could say was, "Now you're ugly. How ugly you are." He was always on tour, pampered by women. My mother made scenes of jealousy. When I was 9 years old and almost died of an appendicitis not diagnosed early enough, and we arrived at Arcachon, where he was vacationing, he made it plain he did not want us. What he meant for my mother I also took for myself. Yet I had a hysterical sorrow when he finally abandoned us. I always feared his hardness and his criticalness. I could not bring myself to see him again.
And so you withdrew into yourself and became independent. I can see you're proud and self-sufficient. You fear the cruelty of older men, so at the first sign of cruelty in anyone, you're paralyzed.
Can a child's confidence, once shaken and destroyed, have such a repercussion on a whole life? Why should my father's insufficient love remain indelible? Why was it not effaced by all the loves I received since he left me?
You seem very well balanced, and I don't believe you need me.
I suddenly felt a great distress at being left alone again to solve my own difficulties. I asked if I might come again. Never have I seen as clearly as tonight that my diary writing is a vice. I came home worn out by magnificent talks with Henry at the cafe. I glided into my bedroom, closed the curtains, threw a log into the fire, lit a cigarette, pulled the diary out of its last hiding place under my dressing table, threw it on the ivory silk quilt, and prepared for bed. I had the feeling that this is the way an opium smoker prepares for his opium pipe. For this is the moment when I relive my life in terms of a dream, a myth, an endless story. I began to write the diary on the ship bringing us to America at the age of 11 for my father, to tell him the story of my wanderings away from him. I tried to mail the volumes, but my mother did not let me, saying they might get lost. When I took communion at Mass, I imagined it was not Christ who visited me in this heart shaped like a room, but my father. I was aware that I had not only lost him, but a way of life, music, musicians, colorful visitors, prestige, a European life, as compared with life in America as an unknown immigrant with drab and colorless friends, and my mother struggling to support us. Again, the voice of Henry Miller is done by Rupert Paul. Many times Henry talks nonsense. He's flushed, he is eloquent, drunk, nonsensical. He gets drunk on words. Summer heat, cafes. Henry has a few pages to show me, the first pages of his new book, Black Spring. He expected me to have written at least 10 pages in my diary after the last talks. But something has happened to the woman with the notebook. I feel like letting Henry do the writing. I want to enjoy the summer day. Words are secondary. Henry is correcting my first novel with care. Henry is a demon driven by curiosity, always pumping people. Henry is always pretending callousness. Is that an American disease? They are ashamed to show feeling?
Anaïs, what you really look like is a Greek. There's something very Grecian about you. But the Greeks, they say, are treacherous. I've not written to June yet. Your book is really beautiful. There are memorable pages in it, and it's sharp and ironic, at times very strong. Most women's writing is so petty. Yours never is. Listen, Anaïs, I know I'm worth more than June. I won't stand for anything when she returns. She must be made to suffer. It will be good for her. You will see, I'm another man. I won't let her override me. I don't like what she does to me when she's here. She humiliates me.
Henry lacks confidence. He's uneasy in certain places, certain situations, and when he's uneasy, he becomes insulting. If we meet chic people or enter a chic place, or if the waiter is snobbish, or if we run into a celebrity, he becomes contrary and difficult. So we either go to Clichy and have lunch with Fred, or sit in cafes, or he comes to Louvciennes. Sometimes I see a gnome like Henry, and I can imagine him as a child, impetuous, restless, mobile, and prankish. Henry may be teaching me how to become tougher, how to laugh, and how to feel less. Fred, Henry, and other friends and I are at the cafe, talking, discussing, arguing, and storytelling until the electric lights went out in the street, the night was dispersed, and a dim, shy, cyan-colored dawn entered the window. The dawn. The dawn, I repeated. Henry thought it was the dawn itself which was a new experience. I could not explain what I felt. It was the first time I had not felt the compulsion to escape. It was the first time I had abandoned myself to fraternity, exchange, confessions, without feeling suddenly the need to take flight. All night I stayed there, without experiencing that abrupt end to fusion, that sudden and painful consciousness of separation, of reaching ultimately and always the need of my own world, the inability to remain outside, estranged at some moment or other from everyone. This had not happened. This dawn had come as the first break in the compulsion and the tyranny of inadaptation. Because I longed to be a part of every intense, every joyous moment, every moment of life, longed to be the woman who was weeping or laughing, the woman who was being kissed amorously before everyone, the woman who was given a flower to wear, the woman who was being helped into the bus, the woman who was leaning out of the window, the one who was being married, the one who was giving birth. The hero of this book may be the soul, but it is an odyssey from the inner to the outer world, and it is Henry who is dispelling the fogs of shyness, of solitude, taking me through the street and keeping me in a cafe until dawn. And so I carry the journal everywhere. The journal is out too. I carry it everywhere, writing on cafe tables while waiting for a friend, on the train, on the bus, in waiting rooms at the station, while my hair is washed, at the Sorbonne when the lectures get tedious, on journeys, trips, almost while people are talking. It is while cooking, gardening, walking, or love-making that I remember my childhood, and not while reading Freud's preface to a little girl's journal. Henry teases me about my memory for conversation. Every now and then he says, "Put this down in your diary." He never says, as others do, "Do not put this down in your diary." Antonin Artaud, whom I met at this period, came for the first time to Louvciennes at the very moment that he was very preoccupied with the theater of cruelty that he was trying to set up. Antonin Artaud is the surrealist whom the surrealists disavowed. He was a lean, ghostly figure who haunts the cafes but who is never seen at the counter drinking or sitting among people laughing. He is the drugged, contracted being who walks always alone, who is seeking to produce plays which are like scenes of torture. His eyes are blue with languor, black with pain. He is all nerves, and yet he was beautiful acting the monk in love with Joan of Arc in the Carl Dreyer film. The deep-set eyes of the mystic as if shining from caverns, deep-set, shadowy, mysterious. For Artaud, writing is painful too. It comes spasmodically and with a great strain. He is poor. He is in conflict with a world that he imagines mocking and threatening. His intensity is brooding, rather terrifying. In the garden, as we stood behind the others, he had cursed hallucinations, and I had said, "In my world of hallucinations, I'm happy." Artaud said, "I cannot even say that. It's torture for me. I make superhuman efforts to awake." Allendy had told me that he had tried to free Artaud of the drug habit which was destroying him. All I could see that evening was his revolt against interpretation. He was in patience with their presence as if they prevented him from exaltation. He talked with fire about the Kabbalah, magic, myths, legends. Allendy had told me that Artaud had talked with him several times, but had finally refused analysis. It was a formula, and yet he admitted it had helped him. When Allendy first came to Louvciennes, he said, "I feel here as in a very distant country." And Artaud had answered, "Not at all. I feel at home here." Rupert Paul will read the description of Artaud's lecture at the Sorbonne.
The scene is the schoolroom of the Sorbonne. Allendy and Artaud were sitting at the big desk. Allendy introduced Artaud. The room was crowded. The blackboard made a strange backdrop. People of all ages, followers of Allendy's lectures on new ideas. The light was crude. It made Artaud's eyes shrink into the darkness, as they are deep set. This brought into relief the intensity of his gestures. He looked tormented. His hair, rather long, fell at times over his forehead. He has the actor's nimbleness and quickness of gestures. His face is lean, as if ravaged by fevers. His eyes do not seem to see the people. They are the eyes of a visionary. His hands are long, long-fingered. Beside him, Allendy looks earthy, heavy, gray. He sits at the desk, massive, brooding. Artaud steps out on the platform and begins to talk about the theater and the plague. It seems that all he is asking for is intensity, a more heightened form of feeling and living. Is he trying to remind us that it was during the plague that so many marvelous works of art and theater came to be, because whipped by the fear of death, man seeks immortality, or to escape, or to surpass himself. And then, imperceptibly almost, he let go of the thread we were following, and began to act out dying by plague. No one quite knew when it began. To illustrate his conference, he was acting out an agony. La peste in French is so much more terrible than the plague in English. But no word could describe what Artaud acted on the platform of the Sorbonne. He forgot about his conference, the theater, his ideas, Dr. Allendy sitting there, the public, the young students, his wife, professors and directors. His face was contorted with anguish. One could see the perspiration dampening his hair. His eyes dilated, his muscles became cramped, his fingers struggled to retain their flexibility. He made one feel the parched and burning throat, the pains, the fever, the fire in the guts. He was in agony. He was screaming. He was delirious. He was enacting his own death, his own crucifixion. At first people gasped, and then they began to laugh. Everyone was laughing. They hissed. Then one by one they began to leave, noisily, talking, protesting. They banged the door as they left. The only ones who did not move were his friends. More protestations, more jeering. But Artaud went on until the last gasp and stayed on the floor. Then when the hall had emptied of all but his small group of friends, he walked straight up to Anaïs and kissed her hand. He asked her to go to the café with him. Everyone else had something to do. We all parted at the door of the Sorbonne, and Artaud and Anaïs walked out in a fine mist. They walked through the dark streets. He was hurt, wounded, baffled by the jeering. He spat out his anger. They always want to hear about. They want to hear an objective conference on the theater and the plague. And I want to give them the experience itself, the plague itself, so they will be terrified and awaken. I want to awaken them. They do not realize they are dead. Their death is total, like deafness, blindness. This is agony I portrayed. Mine, yes, and everyone who is alive.
Then, after many years, someone told me that my father wanted to see me, and I invited him to come to Louvciennes. And this is my father's first visit after the great separation. My father came. I expected the man of the photographs, a more transparent face, a face less furrowed, less carved, less mask-like, and at the same time I liked the new face, the depth of the lines, the firmness of the jaw, the femininity and charm of the smile, all the more startling in contrast to the tanned, almost parchment-toned skin. A smile with a forceful dimple in it, which was not a dimple, but a scar from sliding down a stairway banister and piercing his cheek with an ornament when he was a child. The neatness and compactness of the figure, grace, vital gestures, ease, youthfulness. A gust of imponderable charm, a supreme, open egotism. Webs of talk, defenses against unuttered accusations, justifying his life, his love of the sun, of the south of France, of luxury, preoccupation with the opinion of others, fear of criticism, susceptibility, continuous play-acting, wit and articulateness, violence of images, the lusty and vivid imagery of the Spanish language transposed into French. He had come to France, had studied with Vincent d'Indy, had been made the youngest professor at the Schola Cantorum when I was born. A childlike, disarming smile, always charm, the predominance of charm, undercurrents of puerility, unreality. A man who had pampered himself, or been pampered by women, cottoned himself against the deep pains of living by luxury, by salon life, by aesthetics, yet preoccupied with the fear of destructiveness, compelled to expand, obeying his quest of sensuality, of pleasure, having found no other way to obtain his desires but by deception. A passion for aesthetics and for creation, concerts, compositions, books, articles, research into lost and rare music, discovery of talented people, introducing them to the public, the Aguilar Quartet, La Argentina. Was the source of feeling dried up by pretenses, play-acting, by egotism? Would my double be my evil double? He incarnated all the dangers of my illusory life, my inventing of situations, my deceptions, my faults. In some way they seemed a caricature of me, because mine seemed motivated by deep feelings, and his by more superficial and worldly aims. The public played a major role in his life, the concert stage, the critics, fashionable and titled friends, salons and manners. Something very human and warm in me, my mother, perhaps, lived by truer values in people. He cared about display and dress, money. There was an unawareness of others, almost a cynicism. On his second visit, he was still trying to discover our sameness. We create harmony, security, a shelter, a home, and then we chafe for adventure like restless tigers, restless, vital, fearing to hurt others, to destroy others, but avid for life, renewals, evolutions. We are cowards before the goodness or loyalty of others. People think we are tyrants, but my father and I know how enslaved we are by tenderness, devotion, pity, the goodness of others, and chained. And renewal, said my father, could come from anyone, from nobody. Like a parlor game in which questions are asked, what is your favorite flower, your favorite piece of music? My father was pacing up and down the long red tile floor of the studio, firing questions at me. What about religion? What about politics? What are your ideas on morals? And so exultant because I answered them as he wished me to, as if he had educated me. He says, we do not need to lie to each other. Always the same wish, not to have to lie. But we will, of course, at the first sign of danger, vulnerability, jealousy, withdrawal. We will lie to make an illusory relationship, perfect one, ideal, without wounds. He tells me, you've become beautiful, lovely, that black hair and green eyes and red mouth. One sees that you have suffered, yet the face is smooth, placid. I was standing against the mantelpiece. He was looking at my hands. You have the same long, tapered hands of your grandmother. These hands run in the family. When your ancestor, the court painter who painted portraits of the kings and queens and of aristocrats, the famous people, needed a model for refined hands, he painted in the hands of your great-grandmother. I pulled my hand brusquely, hit the glass ball with the crystal fish and stones, and it broke, and the water ran down the mantelpiece to the floor. He had been saying, in June you must come to the Riviera with me. They will take you for my mistress. That will be delightful. I will say, this is my daughter, and they will not believe me. This diary proves a tremendous, all-engulfing craving for truth, since to write it I risk destroying the whole edifice of my illusions, all the gifts I made, all that I created and protected, everyone whom I saved from the truth. What does the world need? The illusion I gave in life, or the truth I give in writing? When I went about dreaming of satisfying people's dreams, satisfying their hunger for illusion, didn't I know that this was the most painful and the most insatiable hunger? What impels me now to offer truth in place of illusion? I heard about the death of my Spanish dancing teacher, Antonio Francisco Miralles, in a hotel room, alone, of asthma. And I was reminded of the time when he would say to me, Anaïs, I'm a simple man. My parents were shoemakers in a little village in the south of Spain. I was put to work in an iron factory where I handled heavy things and was on the way to becoming deformed by big muscles. But during my lunch hour I danced. I wanted to be a dancer, and I practiced every day, every night. At night I went to the gypsies' caverns and learned from them. I began to dance in cabarets. And today, look. He took out a cigarette case engraved with the names of all the famous Spanish dancers. Today I've been the partner of all these women. If you would come with me, we could be happy. I'm a simple man, but we could dance in all the cities of Europe. I'm no longer young, but I have a lot of dancing in me yet. We could be happy. The merry-go-round turned and sang, and I imagined myself embarking on a dancing career with Miralles, dancing, which was so much like flying from city to city, receiving bouquets, praise in newspapers, with joyous music at the center, always pleasure as colorful as the Spanish dresses, all red, orange, black and gold, gold and purple and red and white. Imagining, like amnesia, forgetting who I was and where I was and why I could not do it, not knowing how to answer so I would not hurt him, I said, "Well, I'm not strong enough." As Allende did not seem to understand the artist, and I had been reading all the books of Dr. Otto Rank, and I had sent Henry Miller to visit him, and that he had a particular understanding of the artist, I decided to just go and visit him one day, and I just rang his bell. But before that, I was sitting on a bench. It was a foggy afternoon when I had decided to call on him. At the subway station near his home there was a small park. I sat down on one of them to prepare myself for the visit. I felt that from such an abundance of life I must make a selection of what might interest him. He had made a specialty of the artist. He was interested in the artist. Would he be interested in a woman who had lived out all the themes that he wrote about, the double, illusion and reality, incestuous love through literature, creation and play, all the myths, return to the father after many adventures and obstacles, all the dreams? I had lived out the entire contents of his profound studies so impetuously that I had had no time to understand them, to sift them. I was confused and lost in trying to live out all of myself. There were always in me two women at least, one woman desperate and bewildered, who felt she was drowning, and another who only wanted to bring beauty, grace, and aliveness to people, and who would leap into a scene as upon a stage, conceal her true emotions, because they were weaknesses, helplessness, despair, and present to the world only a smile, an eagerness, curiosity, enthusiasm, interest. Should I come and say, "Dr. Rank, I feel like a shattered mirror," or else mention my book on D.H. Lawrence and the other books I was writing? He considered Neurosis a failed work of art, the neurotic a failed artist. Neurosis, he had written, was a manifestation of imagination and energy gone wrong. Instead of a fruit or a flower, I had borne obsessions and anxieties. It was this concept which appealed to me, that he did not call it an illness, but, as in nature, a misbegotten object, which might have equal beauty and fascination as the relatives of more legitimate and noble births. Neurosis was Spanish moss on a tree. Which self should I bring him? The Anaïs who could be swept off her feet in the middle of a busy street and experience an emotional levitation? Street, people, incidents, words, all acquired a poetic diffusion, dissolving all sense of obstacle, fatality, crystallization, finite conclusions. It was an abstract drunkenness, druggedness, like the illumination of the poets. Or should I tell him about my crash landings? I had no in-between existence, only flights, mobility, euphoria, despair, depression, disillusion, paralysis, shock, and a shattering of the mirror. And so when I rang the bell, I said, "I'm one of the artists that you're writing about, Dr. Rank." The background of our talks were really books, books, shining and colorful books, many of them bound in many languages. They form the wall against which I see Rank. An impression of keenness, alertness, curiosity, the opposite of the automatic, ready formulas and filing away. The fire he brings to it, as if he felt a great exhilaration in these adventures and explorations. He gets a joy from it. It's no wonder he has evolved what he calls a dynamic analysis, swift, like an emotional shock treatment, direct, short-cut, outrageous according to the old methods. His joyousness and activity immediately relieves one's pain, the neurotic knot which ties up one's faculties in a vicious circle of conflict, paralysis, more conflict, guilt, atonement, punishment, and more guilt. Immediately I felt air and space, movement, vitality, the joy of detecting, divining, the spaciousness of his mind, the fine dexterity and muscular power, the swift changing colors of his own moods, the swiftness of his rhythm, because intuitive and subtle. I trust him. We are far from the banalities and the clichés of orthodox psychoanalysis. I sense an intelligence rendered clairvoyant by feeling. I sense an artist. I tell him everything. He does not separate me from my work. He seizes me through my work. He has understood the role of the diary, playing so many roles: dutiful daughter, devoted sister, mistress, protector, my father's newfound illusion, Henry's needed all-purpose friend. I had to find one place of truth, one dialogue without falsity. When others asked the truth of me, I was convinced it was not the truth they wanted, but an illusion they could bear to live with. I was convinced of people's need of illusion. My father had to believe that after rediscovering each other we would abandon all our other relationships and devote our lives to each other. When he returned to Paris after the relaxation of the summer, his social life began, and he began to try and fit me into it. He wanted me to dress conventionally and discreetly, as the best of the couturiers, as Maruka did. Neutral colors, English tailored suits in the morning, neatly cut and trimmed hair, every hair in place, and appear at his house, where the life resembled that of Jeanne, completely artificial, insincere, snobbish. My artist life was just the opposite. My artist friends liked slovenliness, shabbiness. They were at ease, and would have been more so if I could have dressed indifferently, sloppily, casually, if my hair had been in disorder and my skirt pinned up, etc. Somewhere in between lies Anaïs, who wants a free life, but not a shabby one. And what I have to say is really distinct from the artist and art. It is the woman who has to speak, and it is not only the woman, Anaïs, who has to speak, but I who have to speak for many women. As I discover myself, I feel I am merely one of many, a symbol. I begin to understand June, Jeanne, and many others, Georges Sand, Georgette Leblanc, Eleanora Duse, women of yesterday and women of today. The mute ones of the past, the inarticulate who took refuge behind wordless intuitions, and the women of today, all action and copies of men. And I in between. Here lies the personal overflow, the personal and feminine overfullness, feelings that are not for books, not for fiction, not for art. All that I want to enjoy, not transform. My life has been one long series of efforts, self-discipline, will. Here I can sketch, improvise, be free, and myself. Rank asked me to give up the diary for a while. He felt that it was preventing me from writing novels. The period without the diary remains an ordeal. Every evening I wanted the diary as one wants opium. I wanted nothing else but the diary to rest upon, to confide in, but I also wanted to write a novel. I went to my typewriter and I worked on House of Incest and Winter of Artifice. A deep struggle. A month later, I began the portrait of Rank in a diary volume, and Rank did not feel it was a diary I had resuscitated, but a notebook, perhaps. The difference is subtle and difficult to seize, but I sense it. The difference may be that I poured everything into the diary. It channeled away from invention and creation and fiction. Rank also wanted me to be free of it, to write when I felt like it, but not compulsively. Get out into the world, Rank said. Leave your house at Louvciennes. That is isolation too. Leave the diary. That is withdrawing from the world. And so now I am out. I'm always out, with everybody. Last night I did get sad in the beautiful Scheherazade nightclub with their own people. I pinched myself. Allons donc, streets. You're on the street at last, walking along the crowded streets of Henry's crowded books. External and internal to be balanced, nurturing each other, or else the internal eats me like rust. Introspection almost devoured me, and Henry saved me. He took me down into the street. It is enough that a few hours ago I was obliged to think about my father in order to write about him. It is enough. Come, Square Montelon, Boulevard Jean Jaurès, Rue Saint-Martin, like merry dice dancing in my empty head. It is I who taught Henry that streets in themselves were of no interest. He accumulated descriptions, but I felt they needed to be the decor for some drama, some emotion. It is I who awakened the man who walked through the streets. No more anonymous maps, but maps of both form and content, matter and significance, streets and the men who walk through them. Restless, looking again for intensity, fever, turmoil, everything seems to move too slowly, slowly. And yet my life is full. I'm translating Volume 1 of the diary. I wrote about the incident of looking for Russian-style pajamas for my father. I wrote for House of Incest, a visit to the painting of Lot and his daughter at the Louvre with Artaud. Whenever I feel sadness about my father, I write. When I yearn for him, I write. When I feel regrets, I write. Bloom. There's a bloom on everything and on everybody. Happiness. The soft bloom of happiness. Soft breezes. Talk like a summer breeze. Love like ripe flower. New dresses like new grass. The round curves and smells of summer. Idyllic. Inside the happiness, the worm of imagination, craving, expecting, searching. Has pain made too deep a scar so that I do not feel the gentle touch of happiness? The flesh too scarred, too coarse-grained to feel the softness of the summer? Only another wound can make it tremble. I am not made for happiness. It is like sleep. So now I'm divided into 3 selves. One self lives at Louvciennes, has a Spanish maid, eats breakfast in bed, eats pheasants killed by Lani and Louis Andar, listens to the radio, gives orders to the gardener, pays her bills with checks, sits by an open fire, copies the diaries and translates the secondary volume from French into English, dreams by the window, gets restless for heightened living. In Villa Seurat, with Henry and Fred and a constant stream of people walking in and out, I peel potatoes, grind coffee, French style, write books, drink out of chipped cups and glasses discarded in Louvciennes, wipe my hands with old towels left over from Louvciennes, walk down the cobblestone street to market, repair the phonograph, because Henry is absolutely helpless in practical matters, take the bus, sit at a cafe, talk a great deal about books and films, writing and writers, smoke a great deal, and watch the invasion of people walking in and out of the place. Henry has made friends with all the neighbors. The third self wants to learn a profession so that she may always write as she believes, wants to help Rank make a new life because he helped her make a new life, and wants the unknown, the unfamiliar. I finally promised to go to New York for 2 months. I feel 2 months are short in the span of eternity. But psychoanalysis did save me, because it allowed the birth of the real me, a painful one for a woman, filled with dangers, for no one has ever loved an adventurous woman as they have loved adventurous men. The birth of the real me might have ended like that of my unborn child. I may not become a saint, but I'm very full and very rich. I cannot install myself anywhere yet. I must climb dizzier heights, but I still love the relative, not the absolute, the cabbage and the warmth of the fire, back on the phonograph and laughter and talk in the cafes, and a trunk packed for departure with copies of Tropic of Cancer, and Rank's last SOS, and the telephone ringing all day. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.